Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road to the Anselm Society Digital Pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and, well, what is it? Who is this person, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, on YouTube? It's amazing. In the corner table by the fire are two people. One of them is saying, seriously, I went down a whole YouTube wormhole on Sister Rosetta Tharpe and I can't get enough of it. And that's me, your co-host Matthew Mellema, and welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to help you connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories in order to understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. Now, most anybody listening to a podcast like this can probably list a bunch of examples of great stories that have a message of hope and joy. You can also probably make a list of stories that emerge from great sorrow and suffering. But how about stories that do both? Stories that emerge from a place of tremendous sorrow and suffering, but still have a message of ultimate hope and joy. Now, specifically, what I want to focus on is the tradition of spirituals. Songs that enslaved peoples created in the midst of their enslavement. These songs have a message of faith and hope despite coming from a place of suffering that most of us can't even imagine. These songs are also just beautiful as music and launched a whole unique musical tradition that still resonates to this day. And one of the ways it resonates is with really great upcoming books that are coming out. And the author of one of those books is joining us at the table today. That is Alice Faye Duncan. Alice Faye Duncan has written about a dozen books for children. Her picture books include A Song for Gwendolyn Brooks, Opal Lee and What It Means to Be Free, and Memphis Martin and the Mountaintop. And that last one received a Coretta Scott King Illustrator honor. Her books have been nominated for several other honors, including 2 NAACP Image Awards. And when she's not writing books, she's been a teaching librarian for 29 years, and you may have seen her on different media outlets, including PBS and Dallas Morning News. So needless to say, we're thrilled to have her join us here at the Anselm Digital Pub table. Welcome to the table.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, let's see. I believe you are coming to us from Memphis. Is that right?
That is correct.
Outstanding, outstanding. I love the city of Memphis. As I love. So, little background on me. You may know this, living in Memphis, but there's certain towns that have hey, we have great barbecue. Okay, so I don't come from there, but I have family who's lived in Kansas City for years and years. So I don't mean to start troubled with you, but I come from the Kansas City School of Barbecue. Memphis is another city with a great school. So I don't know if do I dare suggest that because you're from Memphis, you may have a barbecue thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was born and raised in Memphis. My father worked at a barbecue joint.
Okay, good.
So barbecue is a thing here in Memphis.
Okay, now, before we get into the books and everything, what would you say Memphis has to its barbecue scene that other places? You can throw shade on Kansas City if you want to. That other places don't.
No. I think in Memphis, the bologna is a specialty. The barbecue bologna is a specialty. And also, in Memphis, you have the dry rub, spicy seasoning. And so I think those things differentiate us from, let's say, Kansas City, which is famous for burnt bits, right?
Yes.
And so in Memphis, it's not about burnt bits. And Memphis is about being chopped, right?
Okay.
Like the shoulder's chopped and it's pulled, but everybody in Memphis, they prefer the chopped. So, and reality is we all need to be trying to get healthy. What?
Well, health is important, but sometimes eating delicious things are important too. Yeah. Well, listeners, in case you're wondering why I started here, I do have a reason for it. First of all, I love it. But second of all, it shows one of those uniquely American things, and we don't really think about it, but barbecue is a uniquely American tradition. And what we're going to get into today is another uniquely American tradition, just in a different context, and that's music. So we are here. You're here because you have your latest book, This Train is Bound for Glory, which is about another American tradition, right?
Which is the American spiritual, or the Black
Yep.
spiritual, or the Negro spiritual.
Yep.
And the Black spiritual is an American
Yep.
music that we know um, was being created during the institution of American slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Also, oftentimes, the spiritual, it is a sacred song, but oftentimes the spiritual was used as a secret code
Mm.
to the enslaved that were traveling along the Underground Railroad. And so my new book, This Train is Bound for Glory, possibly could have been one of those songs where it's a spiritual song, and the enslaved are singing, "This train is bound for glory, this train," and it sounds like it's a song simply about dying and passing on, going to heaven. But in the context of the Underground Railroad, "This train is bound for glory" could be, or could have been, perhaps a secret code about,
Oh, that's so
tonight
interesting.
we are going north to make our escape.
That is so interesting, and I believe me, I have so many questions about the song "This Train is Bound for Glory" and how you use it in the book. So
Okay.
let's take a half step back first, though, and talk about the history of these spirituals themselves, because that is so fascinating. This is something. One of the many reasons I was so happy to have you on the show is because I've sort of encountered it just in my normal, like, reading and things, just like the
Right.
history of them. Because if I understand it correctly, I will yield to your understanding here more. But basically, so these folks come over in slavery. Uh, they take some of the religion of, they adopt Christianity, but in doing so reject all of the awful things for like their slave owners, and create these songs that they're just objectively gorgeous as music. They contain really profound lyrics about perseverance through all their suffering, and oftentimes have the codes in there too. So how did these happen? How did these grow out?
Well, I mean, being in the crucible of affliction, I'm surely
Mm-hmm.
helped.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but also being practical and needing something of necessity to communicate uh, without being discovered by the plantation owners. So this music had a dual purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, when American slavery is over, then the music of the spiritual was sung in like the Black churches,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't become popular in the American canon of music until like maybe the late 1800s, when
Huh.
slavery is over, and you have the establishment of Black colleges, Black
Mm-hmm.
universities. And so one of those colleges and universities was Fisk
Mm-hmm.
University in Nashville. I'm in Tennessee. Um, in Nashville, and they had a woman there who started a chorus. And what she did was, she had the students sing these spirituals that had lasted, come from the time of American slavery. When they take the spirituals abroad, it's sort of like she starts these concerts, she takes the chorus abroad. Why? Practical reasons. She takes them abroad to raise money for the college,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so once they began to travel overseas, they began to travel within the United States to white
Yeah.
audiences. The white audiences take to the music, and then record promoters take to the music. And
Mm-hmm.
so then you get the music being promoted in records, on the Victrolas and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
or the phonographs, right? But then you also once the spirituals are made popular by the colleges, and now black colleges, black universities now singing the spirituals, and it now becomes quote unquote concert music,
Hmm.
you then have African American musicians and artists like Paul Robeson, like Marian Anderson, who also now began to use the spiritual as part of their concert music. And so, where oftentimes those who were surviving American slavery were like, oh, this is a part of our pain. This is what we remember as our collective consciousness of pain. But then the artists began to amplify it, and it's now widely accepted as concert music,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And then and Leontine Price. I mean, so many. Leontine Price, Paul Robeson, Roland Freeman, just so many African American performers then began to adopt a whole canon of spirituals to perform. But and then in the Black church itself, it survived. Spirituals
Yep.
survive, and we come to this very moment where in the Black church, spirituals remain a balm of blessing to parishioners and lay folks, right, in the church.
Yeah. So
Black folks.
yeah. No, absolutely. And you can see these two trajectories, right? It's how it gets adapted in sort of popular culture. Like you said, it's people outside of this community like, oh man, this music's amazing. And then it sort of takes all these different forms, and it sort of also persists within the churches as well. It's so fascinating. And when you really start researching, it's like, oh, this influenced so much of
It
what
does.
we take for granted.
Right. And so for me, because I live in Memphis, Memphis is the front door of the Mississippi Delta. The Delta
Mm-hmm.
is where you have the Delta blues. Delta blues then gave birth to rock and roll.
Yep.
But oftentimes, blues music, just like the spiritual, blues music is the secular reflection of the sacred spiritual. You know, a song of joy, a song of sorrow that is serving as a balm to the soul.
Mm. Yeah, and again, like you said, like you can really draw a straight line between rock and roll and this tradition, can't you?
Of rock, of blues music
Yeah,
and rock,
blues. Yeah.
of blues music and rock and roll, you absolutely can. And if you think of Sister Rosetta Tharpe, like,
Yeah.
so Sister Rosetta Tharpe is considered the godmother of rock and roll, but Sister Rosetta Tharpe comes out of the Kojic church. She comes out of the Black Pentecostal church where she was playing guitar and piano to spiritual songs. So her whole canon, which is how I discovered this train is bound for glory. Her whole canon, much of it is simply gospel songs that have been revved up to a electric guitar sound.
Yep.
That electric guitar sound is what gives you rock and roll.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you brought up Sister Rosetta Tharpe, because I have been chomping at the bit to talk about her, because I feel like she's been one of the things like I did just happen upon recently that I want to share with all the podcast listeners. So again, like you said, she's considered sort of the godmother of rock and roll. She was performing early to mid part of the 20th century. Her influences, and I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page, so I didn't have to go too in depth for this. The folks she influenced include Little Richard, Johnny Cash, Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley, and Eric Clapton. So really, she's a foundational figure in early rock and roll. And listeners, I cannot encourage you strongly enough. Get on YouTube, look at some Sister Rosetta Tharpe videos. It's fascinating because, first of all, she's up there on stage with her electric guitar. She's wearing a dress like my grandma would wear to church, so she's all dressed up nice.
She's wearing a dress, a wig, costume, jewelry, just like grandma.
Exactly.
But she's rocking it like a beast. I mean, she's just rocking it like, she's she's just rocking it like a progenitor of the of rock and roll that she is. What happens is, if you look at her canon, you will see that she has several spirituals. She has "This Train Is Bound for Glory." She has what's the song about "Didn't It Rain,
Yeah,
Children"?
yeah.
You will see "Precious Memories." "Precious Memories." She sings so many church songs, but she rocks them. You know, she makes them, she jazzes them up, and you hear that sacred music influence, right? But then you also hear something else that is very spirited, and whirly, for lack of a better word. And that's what leads us to that rock and roll sound that we have today. And, she was a part of the Chicago, electric blues sound.
Yeah, and like you said, one of the things a couple things stood out to me. So again, she dresses like my grandma going to church, but she just shreds on the guitar. Like when she gets going, it's incredible. Her voice is so emotive and powerful, and her command of the audience is just absolutely fantastic, right? Because she's, again, when she's traveling, this is a time like it's an almost exclusively white audience, but she just had the command of them, and her power as a performer is
it's the Holy Ghost. I would say it's the Holy Ghost, right? It's something, as Lucy Eddy Campbell would say, who was a Black woman who wrote a lot of gospel songs. It's something within that, that is expressive, that is human, because music is the universal language, right? And and just music should be celebrated, and music should be celebrated.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you can, and again, listeners, right after you're done listening to this, go to YouTube, check her out. It's so worth your while. And one of the reasons is she also seems to function as a bridge, like between like the sort of the older tradition and the newer tradition, where she sort of incorporates both, introduces folks after her to what came before her. Does that sound like I'm on the right track there?
Well, so she comes from Cotton Plant, Arkansas, which is the Arkansas Delta. And so she does not begin playing guitar on an electric guitar. She begins playing a acoustic guitar that she learned from her mother. Okay. And her mother was a Pentecostal church lady, church evangelist, right? In fact, the way that I discovered her version of "This Train Is Bound for Glory" is that it's gone now, but there was, and I live in a Black neighborhood in Memphis, but there was, in my neighborhood, there used to be this gospel record shop. And this was in the 90s. And so at the time in the 90s, they sold a lot of gospel cassettes, and they sold a lot of gospel compact disc. And so it was one time during when the Church of God in Christ were actually in town. And so when the Church of God in Christ convention would come to town, then you knew that at that gospel shop, they were going to like increase their inventory, pad their inventory with all of this good music. And so it was an ideal time to visit them, because they would be selling a lot of music to the Kojic church members who were in town. And so I went one day, and I was just like, perusing through the CDs and perusing through the cassettes. And they had like just a whole like tray after tray after tray of Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And I had not really heard Sister Rosetta Tharpe before, but they had so many of them. I was like, it must be something to this. And so I took, bought one, took it home, And that's when I heard This Train is Bound for Glory. I heard Didn't It Rain? I heard Precious Memories. Just so many wonderful songs. And I was like, when I heard her version of This Train is Bound for Glory, I said, it's a song about heaven, and it's like, and I want to share this joyful experience about heaven with children. And so from the 90s, I'd been really preoccupied with how do I write my version of this story and make it relevant, make it matter to young children. But it wasn't until the 2000s, good in the 2000s, not even the early 2000s, until I found an avenue to do that, or I found the words to do that.
So that is fascinating. I love how it took that long for the idea to sort of marinate until it came out into this
for me
book.
to get it right, for me to really get it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great segue, because now I want to talk about the book, This Train is Bound for Glory, and we'll talk about the song it's based on in a bit too, but let's talk about the book. You told us a little bit about the original idea, but how did you decide to give it the form that it has right now as a children's picture book?
Well, so I listened to Sister Rosetta Tharpe's version, and she says something about, in one of her verses, about everybody rides the train. And immediately that made me think of something international. It made me think of that verse where it says, God is no respecter of persons. And so that's when I said, you know what? I want my train then to have a variety of eclectic personalities. The version that Sister Rosetta Tharpe sings, the version that Johnny Cash sings, the version that Louis Armstrong sings, and the version that Big Bill Bronzy sings, it's all about drinking and smoking and all of these things. And I was like, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to talk about that in the children's book. I mean, smoking and drinking is not good for you, but I don't want to make that this type of book. And so I began to look and see, what could I talk about? So it's like, oh, I can talk about cowboys coming from a dusty field. I can talk about a grandmother who is, looking for the joy of heaven because now it's no more tears. I can talk about a little girl who is on the train with her mother and her baby sister or her baby brother. I can have, who can I have? I was like, who can I have to sing? I was like, oh, I can have a little boy on the train singing. And so you have this, and I can have people dancing. You just have this eclectic group of folks, and now they're all on their way to heaven, right? Which is the land of no more, right? According to Revelations, heaven, a land of no more crying, a land of no more dying, a land of no more division, right? Just howdy, howdy, and never goodbye, as the old folks say.
Yeah, and so I read the book ahead of this interview, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so some of the things that stood out to me were like you said, it's eclectic is the perfect word for all the people on the train, right? It's not just from one particular group. It's not from one particular time period. It's folks from all over. You have the grandmas, you have the babies, you have the cowboys coming in, you have the people playing jazz, you have the little kid in his karate outfit.
You've got like the fireman on board. Yep. You've got a football player on board. You've got a pot-belly daddy on board. I mean, you've got an opera singer singing. You just have just a variety of people. And, my prayer is that that's what heaven will truly be like,
Yeah, absolutely. And I thought it was captured by your lyrics, and also the illustrator, Paul Kellum, I thought did a fantastic job capturing that as well. And so in that the train, obviously it's bound for glory, so it shows the train going through different terrain. It goes through the desert where the cowboys come up, it goes through the mountains, it goes out in toward heaven, and it's just a,
It goes through the galaxy.
yep. And then I especially wanted to ask you about the design of the train with the sort of lion on the engine and the conductor. What went into the design of those and making them the way
Well,
they were?
well, when we think about heaven, and when we think about Jesus Christ, what do we say? Jesus Christ, he's the what? The Lion of what? The Lion of Judah,
Yeah.
right? And so there was that dominant imagery, but also something else was going on. When we think about heaven, we think of the cosmos, we think of the galaxy. So that's why the train is going through the sky, and then also, we always think of the pearly gates, and and so that's why a lot of those images are there. But it was a dominant image in my mind that I shared with the illustrator, because I wanted it to be the image that inspired his work. And that is, I don't know how old you are, but if you looked at Soul Train with Don Cornelius when you were a child, you will remember that the intro to the show was the Soul Train, chugging along through the galaxy, over through the stars, all around the moon and planets. And that's what I want. I wanted him to capture, if he could, that ethereal, starlight, cosmic essence of heaven, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he did it. I think he did an excellent job of that.
Yo, absolutely, absolutely. I thought it was great. And one other thing that I thought was so interesting, because, again, I really do think eclectic is the right word, because it's all these people that they're on the same train, they're all going to the same place, but there's certain things that they all have in common, right? Like their joy, like there's a lot of dancing, there's a lot of singing, there's all this joy, but even in the midst of that expression, they're all uniquely themselves. Like that, they don't all turn into the same person on the train. They're still
No.
themselves, but they're all going to the same place.
Exactly. And so, right. And they're coming from different countries. They're coming from, they're coming from different countries, different regions of the world. They're coming from different races and places, right? And so the reason why I wrote the story also is because when we think of heaven, or when we think, that's it. When we think of heaven, we think of death, or I should say the opposite of that. When we think of death, we think of dying, and then we think of heaven. But oftentimes, we can't get to the glory of heaven in our mind because we're so preoccupied with the sadness of death.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted to do is, because I know children experience death at a variety of times in their lives. Children experience grandparents dying. Children experience pets dying. Children experience parents dying. Children experience other children dying. I wanted to present young readers with a book that will give them joy about the possibility of death, that would make them sing, that would make them think of dancing, that would make them, give them a perspective that was less on the grief of it and more on the gladness of it, and so I hope that I achieved that. I hope that I achieved that. I enjoy reading it because I get to sing it, because it is a call and response song. And that's another reason. That's another reason why I wrote it. Also, I wanted to write a book that was a call and response, that would make reading interactive, that would make reading intergenerational. So a
Mhm.
parent and a kid could both participate in this experience. So a kid and another kid could participate in this experience. So a grandparent and a child could participate in this experience.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned about the sort of participation with different people in it, because one of the things I found really interesting about the book is, after the main part of the book, there's like an activity section at the end where you sort of
Yes.
you give some history of the song, which was really good, and then sort of a step-by-step thing is like, hey, readers, kids, you can create your own verse to this song, and here's how. So tell us about the thought process behind that, because I thought it was super interesting.
Okay, well, here's the thing about spirituals. Spirituals change. Spirituals can change from person to person. They can change from generation to generation. If you listen to the rendition of Sister Rosetta Tharpe's version and you listen to Johnny Cash's version and then you listen to Louis Armstrong's version and then you listen to Bill Bronzy's version, you will notice that there are some similarities in terms of the lyrics, but then they also, each of them goes on to make the lyrics their very own.
Mm-hmm.
And so the great thing about spirituals is that it offers children an opportunity. My book offers children an opportunity to use their own creative genius to make their own version of the song so that they can write about things that are important to them.
Mm-hmm.
So some children might want to amplify their animals and their pets. Some children might want to amplify kids in school, the teachers that they like, right? Some kids might want to amplify sports, their sports teams. Some some kids might want to amplify the dolls and the stuffed animals that they have. But here's the thing, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Each child is offered an opportunity to employ their own creativity. And what the book does is, whereas kids already spend every day at school doing these academic writing activities, so my book is an opportunity to move from writing because you have to write and move to writing because you want to create something for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is this: if children are going to be the poets and the musicians of tomorrow, they have to begin practicing their craft at some point. You don't want a child to wait until they're grown to talk about, I'm going to write music. They should have opportunities to write music and lyrics and poetry and raps while they are young so that they can discover their talent and hone their talent while they're young. My mother was a school teacher. My father was a school teacher. I am my mother's only child, and recently my mother passed away like a month ago. That's a whole nother story. But as their only child, they always gave me room. They purchased me oodles and oodles of journals and oodles of pencils and pens. And they gave me so much room. They encouraged me to write. My mother did not like the fact that I wrote in a Black vernacular because she was a school teacher and she wanted my English to be so precise. But I was writing in a language that was the language of my community, and it was a language that was communicating effectively what I wanted to write about. And so children need that opportunity to express themselves in a way that they want to, not because they have to. And in that, you will discover your new poets and you will discover your new lyricists and your new writers.
No, that's so great. And the word that kept sort of coming to my mind as you were explaining that is generosity in the tradition, and this
Mm.
generosity in the book. Because one of
Mhm.
the things that kept coming up in your explanation of the book, in the text of the book itself, is this living interaction with with the source material, right? We talked about the roots of the song, "This Train is Bound for Glory," coming out of, from the folks who were enslaved, how it has all these double meanings regarding like the trek to freedom, how it changes throughout time, it goes different directions, like this living thing. It's like, hey, it's
Mm-hmm.
passed on from person to person. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
learn this, but then you make it your own. And that
Mm-hmm.
is such a powerful thing where you're wrestling with tradition, you're taking in all the beauty, all the power of it, but it's still your job to pass it on to the next people, and you do that by making it your own. It's sort
Mm-hmm.
of this both and thing that I think is fascinating and so important.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah, and now let's talk about the song itself. "This Train is Bound for Glory," because as we suggested, it has a long heritage. Like it seems to really pop onto the popular consciousness. I believe you mentioned it's like in 1922 at least, but it seems to
That's
have roots that go back further. Is that right?
that was the first. I think the first recording was like 1922,
Mm-hmm.
and then Sister Rosetta Tharpe, she records it twice.
Mm-hmm.
I think she records it twice. And the one that became the most popular for her, I think, was 1940.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Cash recorded it, I think, in the 70s. So every decade and generation has had someone who has picked up the song and made it popular music. Ironically, someone has picked up the song and made this Negro spiritual a popular music. And so now what I want to do is I want to make it popular with children of today.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about the Psalms in the Bible written by, oftentimes, the Psalms written by frail, fragile, and unperfect people.
Mm-hmm.
But the text is inspired all the same. And so these Psalms give us comfort, right? And so that's what the spirituals do. But unlike the Psalms, the spirituals are not written down for
Mm-hmm.
us to refer to over and over and over again. So what I wanted to do is give this one particular spiritual a lasting element by publishing it
Mm-hmm.
and making it, at least in this one document, make it immortal.
Yeah.
As you also have the comfort of the Psalms, right?
Yeah.
And so I just really hope that children will, quote unquote, catch the spirit.
I
And
I
that,
really I really think that will happen. Like I can already picture I have 4 young children, so just about the target age for your book is like, oh, I can picture what my kids will put in for their verses. They will love it.
I just hope that children will catch the spirit and that it will be a balm of joy
Hmm.
for many. Yeah, for many. Because that's when I first heard it and it first pricked my ears, it made me feel joyful. And what's really ironic now is that when I wrote it and it became a published book and I knew that it was going to have a pub date and all of this, my mother, my 86-year-old mother, was very much alive. And now my 86-year-old mother is very much passed away and she is an angel in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And so now when I read the book or sing the book, it has a very special meaning to me because now I am thinking of my mother who is in heaven, and I have great, fun, joyful thoughts about her and this new existence that she has. And I'm like, oh, God has a sense of humor. I'm thinking I'm writing this book for young children, but in fact, I have now created a book for myself.
Mm-hmm.
with the
Yeah.
passing of my mother.
Yeah, and it goes to that passing down that you were talking about earlier, the connection between the one generation and another, where you can see the influence of just for you, like the different generations. That's so fascinating. And one of the other things that your book made me think about is, I'm in one of those traditions. I go to an Anglican church, so it's a very international fellowship. So we have lots of churches, South America, Africa, Asia. We're very proud of that. So, we're very old, right? So we go back hundreds of years. So one of the things my pastor will tell us is we're coming up for communion every week. It's like, hey, picture this table like stretching really far out, both across the world and across time, right? To very different people from different centuries, different countries today, all very different, all very much themselves, but still, we're all coming to the one table. We're all still bound for the same place. And
We
that was
believers,
one of the
right?
things that came to my mind as I was reading your book. And that's one of the best ways I can commend it. It's like, it made me think of that. It sort of captured like that moment for me.
And that was the intention.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go to the very first verse
Yeah.
of the book, it's the very first verse of the book. It says, what does it say here? This train is bound for glory. This train is bound for glory. This train is bound for glory. Everybody here is rocking and rolling. This train is bound for glory. This train. And then it says, a little girl dressed in blue is giddy with joy and wonderment. The trip ahead will be a thrilling ride. She sings to the baby on her mother's knee. This train is leaving the station. This train is leaving the station. This train is leaving the station. The people on board come from every nation. This train is leaving the station. This train.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We're running low on time for today, but so before we go, can you tell us where can we find you? Where can we find your book?
Okay, so This Train is Bound for Glory is available wherever books are sold, online, in the stores. And also, I have a website where you can find me and the plethora of other books that I have written, which is www.alicefayeduncan.com. That's Faye with an E. And I pray that you will buy one and give one away, which is buy one book for your home and then give one away to another home where there might not be any books.
Oh, that is a very good thought. I'm glad you said that, because as during this whole thing, it's like, well, I'll definitely buy one for my family. It was like, oh, maybe the second one too. That's a good idea. Absolutely.
Thank you so very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Alice Faye Duncan. This Train is Bound for Glory. Please do check it out. I really highly recommend it. And listeners, as you all can probably tell, things are winding down at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire's down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you've polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have a few seconds to spare right now, please rate and review the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.